Hello, everyone! The long-awaited new field archer, Arslan, was finally shown by the developers very recently. This time, Lilith really dragged things out with the new commanders. Ideally, they should have revealed them a couple of weeks ago, but they only showed them now. I want to believe that the new archer will appear in the game as early as next week together with the wheel. That way, those who are currently in KVK would still have time to play him, including me. But honestly, it is hard to believe because we have not seen something like that in a long time. Most likely it will happen after the update scheduled for May 7th. Maybe this time the event series will start faster than usual, and then we will get the new archer before the fights at 7 pass. Okay, I think we have figured that part out. Let's move on to breaking down the skills of the new archer, Alp Arslan. And this time, Lilith seems to have outdone themselves with the skill descriptions. They are written in such a long and complicated way that while I was reading them, I could not shake the feeling that I was not analyzing a commander's skills, but an entire encyclopedia. Everything is pretty confusing, and in some places the wording even contradicts itself. So today, I will be acting as a translator from Lilith language into human language, and I will immediately explain what all of this actually means. At the same time, the new archer himself turned out to be really interesting, and honestly, he is actually very good. The first skill, and the first thing that stands out, is target type, single. But in reality, that is not entirely true, and he does have something similar to area damage, but we will get to that later. We also see rage requirement, which already means he is not like Qin Shi, who does not accumulate rage, but spends it, and of course, that is a downside for him. Damage factor 2000, that is very low, but this is far from his final number. And at the end, we will calculate his full damage factor. After activating the active skill, this commander's troop gains the Lion Soul effect for 10 seconds, and let's immediately move on to how this Lion Soul effect works. Inflicts 1 stack of pierce on the target troop every 3 seconds. Pierced targets take additional damage with damage factor 100 every second for 5 seconds. This effect can stack up to 3 times, and its duration resets whenever it gains another stack. If we calculate everything, then over 1 cycle we will deal 2,400 damage factor. But here it is important to understand that this happens over 12 seconds, and it is not fully clear yet what will happen when we stop attacking the target, whether the Lion Soul effect will reset or not. But judging by the description, it looks like a debuff. And if we jump ahead a bit to the third skill, it works there even if we are not attacking the target, so it is quite possible these calculations are correct, even if we stop attacking. But it is important to note that the target may already have stack of pierce, and this will still work. Also, jumping a little ahead again to the second skill, it says that for the first 10 seconds after entering combat, basic attacks have a 50% chance to inflict 1 stack of pierce. The point is that quite often we will immediately have 2 to 3 stack of pierce, and then, in the best case scenario, with 3 stack of pierce, we will deal 1,500 damage factor over 5 seconds. Why did it become 5 seconds instead of 12? The description says that this effect can stack up to 3 times, and pierced targets take additional damage with damage factor 100 every second for 5 seconds. So I assume that if there are already stacks, it will only work for 5 seconds. Honestly, this is all very confusing and definitely needs testing. Also, if you remember, usually debuffs from the active skill might not apply if the target already has a similar effect with higher values. In other words, if 2 Arslans are hitting the same target, then logically, the weaker additional damage from Lion Soul effect should not work. But something tells me that the case with Arslans will be an exception, and his additional damage will stack with other Arslans. This is exactly what I was talking about. Everything is very confusing and unclear. It can work either very well or very badly, and we have only read the first skill. The second skill is pretty easy to understand. If you are not rallying and not garrisoning, you get 25% health and 15% attack. Not bad. For the first 10 seconds after entering combat, basic attacks have a 50% chance to inflict 1 stack of pierce. Cooldown, 5 seconds. We already talked about this. It is a way to get an additional 1 stack of pierce for Lion Soul effect. The troop gains a 10% bonus to healing received and 25% march speed. That is an excellent speed stat, which is great. As for the healing, I would not call it anything too significant. The third skill is the most complicated one, and it literally looks like a page from an encyclopedia. To make it easier to understand, I will explain it visually right away. For every 5 instances of debuffs it inflicts, this commander's troop gains the benevolence effect for 10 seconds. This should not be difficult, especially if paired with Hermann. Basic attacks have a 50% chance to select up to 3 non-target enemy troops centered around the target troop. These non-target troops receive 2 debuffs inflicted on the target troop by this commander, including Pierce, Poison, Slow, and normal debuffs, other than additional damage. Cooldown, 4 seconds. So with this, we transfer 2 debuffs from the target troop to 3 non-target enemy troops. Something like infecting the surrounding enemies. For example, if the target troop had a debuff of 1 stack of Pierce, then it can be transferred to the nearest 3 non-target enemy troops. If you still remember, pierced targets take additional damage with damage factor 100 every second for 5 seconds. So this should work like area damage. But here is what confuses us. And normal debuffs other than additional damage. And in the description it says, pierced targets take additional damage. So its only purpose is additional damage. There are 2 options here. Either this does not work as area damage and we simply increase stacks of pierce without additional damage, or it still does work as area damage. Personally, I lean toward the second option. But then this implies that we do not necessarily have to attack the target, for pierced targets take additional damage with damage factor 100 every second. And that sounds insane. It reminds me of Qin Shi. Cooldown. 4 seconds tells us that in theory, we can constantly deal additional damage because pierced targets take additional damage with damage factor 100 every second for 5 seconds. And he may have enough time to refresh it. Besides pierced, other debuffs are also mentioned, such as poison, which Hermann and Tomiris have. Honestly, it is not clear how the game will determine the priority of debuffs, but it may very well be in the same order as written, or random, which would already be worse. And another interesting thing is that it says, inflicted on the target troop by this commander, which basically means non-target enemy troops should only be infected by debuffs from Arslan. But I think this is a typo, because, for example, he does not have poison. Everything is very confusing. Let's read further. For every 5 instances of buffs it provides, this commander's troop gains the malevolence effect for 10 seconds. So for this, we need 5 instances of buffs. Has a 50% chance to heal a percentage of slightly wounded units when dealing direct damage or true damage equal to 20% of its damage factor. Cooldown, 3 seconds. Overall, this part is made specifically for Shajar because it will work best with her. In all other cases, it will not be very significant because you need 5 instances of buffs. The only exception might be Philip, but it does not look like he will be a good pairing. Skill 4. When this commander is in a field troop. When using an active skill, this commander's troop deals direct damage to the target troop. Damage factor equals number of debuffs on target troop multiply 100 for a maximum damage factor of 1000. Okay, another direct damage. It is also important to note that it says, this commander's troop deals direct damage, which means we will deal 2 instances of direct damage. As for the damage factor, it depends on the number of debuffs on target troop, and that means we are talking about all debuffs on the target troop. It is hard to say how many there will be because we still do not understand how pierce and poison will be counted, but I think on average it will be around 5. So in total, from 2 direct damage instances, we will have 1,000 damage factor. When this commander's troop deals skill damage, it has a 50% chance to take 10% less damage for 3 seconds. Again, it says, this commander's troop deals skill damage, which means both commanders, and again, there is no cooldown. It also says skill damage here, which means includes direct damage and additional damage. Roughly speaking, we will almost always have take 10% less damage. The expertise skill, and once again, a ton of text. When this commander's troop inflicts a debuff, inflicted targets lose 5% defense for 5 seconds. This effect can stack up to 2 times, and its duration resets whenever it gains another stack. It can be triggered up to 3 times per second, and each target troop can trigger the effect up to 1 time per second. Cooldown, 1 second. If I understood everything correctly, then in 1 moment we can apply a 5% defense debuff to a maximum of 3 marches. The debuff stacks up to 10% defense, and with every new stack, the 5-second timer refreshes. Cooldown, 1 second, so there will be a lot of debuffs. This is a very strong debuff that will work very well with Herman and, in general, will reduce the defense of the whole murder ball quite nicely. When this commander's troop provides healing or buffs, healed or buffed targets gain 2% defense for 5 seconds. This effect can stack up to 5 times, and its duration resets whenever it gains another stack. It can be triggered up to 3 times per second, and each target troop can trigger the effect up to 1 time per second. Cooldown, 1 second. This is the opposite situation compared to the debuff. This time, we are buffing defense. Basically, this will work properly only with Shajar and Philip, and 5 seconds for stacking up feels kind of too short. I think for most people this part will not play a big role. Maybe in the Osiris League someone will be able to get value from this, but honestly, I doubt it. And even there, Shajar and Philip will not become good options as pairings for Arslan. Let's summarize, but before that, let's calculate Arslan's final total damage factor. First thing is active skill damage factor 2000. For Lion Soul effect, I took the value where there is already 1 stack of pierce, damage factor 2100. Then area damage from skill 3, assuming that this stack of pierce will be the first one, gives a total damage factor of 1500 for 3 targets. But here it is important to understand that if the debuff is selected randomly in the 3rd skill, then the value will most likely be lower. But real testing is needed here. And in the 4th skill, damage factor 1000. So in total, damage factor 6600. And this is not even his maximum, but an average value. Even that is already amazing. For comparison, Achilles has damage factor 5000. On top of that, most of Arslan's damage factor is instant damage, which is very valuable in the current back-and-forth reality of the game. Let's summarize. First, his skills are very confusing and ambiguous. Arslan needs testing more than almost any other commander in order to answer all the questions. He can be either very good or just a regular commander who is not worth gold heads. But personally, I lean toward the idea that a lot of things will work the way I explained in this video, and Arslan will be amazing. The key question is whether he has area damage from skill 3. If he does, then he is already worth spending gold heads on. He really does feel similar to Qin Shi because of his instant damage. They are very similar in spirit as commanders, but there is no doubt that Qin Shi will remain the best. Arslan is good, maybe even better than Sun Tzu Prime, but definitely not Qin Shi. Instant damage is what will make Arslan amazing on the field and, in the end, let him show good reports with positive trades almost always, just like Qin Shi. I also like his versatility. He will work with all archers. Yes, for Qin Shi he is far from a perfect pairing, at least because their overall percent skill damage will be very low, since neither of them gets it in their skills. But within one archer march, Qin Shi Arslan will very likely be the best. Within 2 marches, definitely not. Hermann has very strong synergy with Arslan and brings out his full potential, so even such an old commander as Hermann will return to the meta. Despite everything I have said, my main recommendation is not to rush with upgrading Arslan, because there are too many questions around his skills. Also remember that this year, around autumn, we will get one more archer commander. What he will be like is, of course, unknown, but if Arslan does not live up to expectations, then maybe it is worth waiting for him. Still, I personally lean toward the idea that Arslan will be amazing, and if that is the case, I will upgrade him. Hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.